Hello everyone, welcome back to Get Your Play Online. Tonight I'm very excited to read a new book with you, and this book is called Smokey the Raccoon. And it is all about a raccoon named Smokey and his adventures with a little girl named Emily. So, are you guys excited to get started? Oh, also, I should mention that the book is written by Peggy Featherstone and it is illustrated by Charles R. Murphy. It's a true story of a family friend that just happened to be a little rascal of a raccoon and the adventures that he brought one summer. Okay, so let's get started. Here's the picture on the first page. Emily Martin sat on the steps of the huge porch that stretched all across the front of the farmhouse where she lived with her mother and father and her older brother Jason. Emily was 8 years old, a pretty girl with long blonde hair, sparkling blue eyes, and a sprinkling of freckles across her cheeks left there by the summer sun. She was generally a very happy little girl, but living on a country farm, there were often no other children nearby to play with in the summertime when school was out. Her brother Jason was actually 5 years older than Emily, and he was much too busy with his chores on the farm and his older friends to do the 8-year-old things that Emily liked to do. This morning seemed to be one of those restless kind of days for Emily. She was trying to decide whether she wanted to gather some of the pretty wild flowers that grew in the field next to the farm, or whether she would go down to the little creek that flowed through the farmland beyond the field. She liked to walk along the water's edge looking for pretty stones, and once she had even found a beautiful turtle there. But suddenly, Emily's mood was interrupted by a familiar sound. What do you think the sound was? She sat up sprightly, listening closely to determine where it was coming from. The sound couldn't actually be called a purring, though it sounded something like that. It was rather a more mysterious, fluttering sound that would certainly catch the attention of anyone who heard it, cause them to wonder, what was that? Well, it was that peculiar sound that Emily was hearing this morning, and it was coming from the direction of the field, and it was getting louder and louder as it approached the porch. Suddenly, an animal came into view. Emily jumped up, began waving and calling out, "Good morning, Smokey. I've been waiting for you. Where have you been all morning?" See, so here's Smokey, her raccoon friend, and he is the one that she heard making some noise. So here's the picture of their house on the next page, and so that's Emily and the raccoon named Smokey. Smokey was a friendly raccoon who had come to the farm one day early in the summer and decided to make the Martin family his own. He had taken a shine to Emily, and she was delighted to share a special friendship with him. She called him Smokey. She had chosen that name because his fur truly did look like a puff of gray smoke, except for the area around his eyes, which was jet black and shaped like a perfect mask. So it covered kind of this area around his eyes. It made him look as though he were ready to go trick-or-treating or to attend a masquerade party somewhere. He also had another unusual feature. His tail was very large and fluffy, and was all striped in rings of black and gray. A very impressive tail it was indeed. But what was especially likable about this fellow was that the black mask he always seemed to be wearing gave him the look of a mischief maker, looking out from behind his mask for some mischief to make, and that look was very close to right. Smokey and Emily had a very special relationship. He would crawl up on her shoulder and travel about with her wherever she might go during the day. It became a familiar sight during the summer for any visitor to the farm to see Smokey sitting up on Emily's shoulder with one little paw around her neck, purring in his special fluttery way, and Emily talking to Smokey as well. This was the way they traveled together, engaging in conversation only they seemed to understand. So here's the picture again. Oh, look at this picture on the next page. What do you think happened? We're about to read about it. Emily's mother, however, was not always happy to have Smokey around, because he did indeed often get into mischief. What sort of mischief, you might ask? Well, you see, Smokey had tiny paws that looked almost like real hands, and he could use them almost like real hands as well. He could turn the handle of the screen door and open it by climbing up on the porch railing, which was close to the door, and he let himself into the house whenever he wanted to go inside. Even though Mrs. Martin would lock the door from the inside on occasion to keep Smokey out, if he really wanted to get into the house, that is, if Emily were inside, he would waddle around to the large picture window in the dining room, and with his little paws he would pull the screen back just far enough to squeeze through the open window and let himself into the house. He would go immediately to Emily's bedroom in search of his friend. If he could not find Emily, very often he would curl up under the big round coffee table in the living room and take himself a little nap. The Martin family all finally accepted Smokey's presence and were never surprised to see him roaming around in search of Emily. Smokey never really meant to cause trouble. It was just his curiosity that seemed to lead him from one thing to another. Just like that time he was looking for Emily, and she was nowhere to be found. The house door was locked, so he let himself in by slipping through the screen of the dining room window. The house was so very quiet, and no one seemed to be about. He waddled out into the kitchen, which was generally off limits for him when Emily's mother was home. He spotted the sugar bowl on the cupboard, climbed up, and helped himself to a handful of the sugar. Yum, yum! But then, in his haste to devour more of this newly discovered treat, he knocked the china sugar bowl to the floor, where it shattered into 100 pieces. What a mess! So that's what this picture is of here. He shattered the container that the sugar was in up on the shelf. And look at the next picture. Looks like he was caught, doesn't it? Just about that time, Emily and her mother returned home from shopping, and when Mrs. Martin saw the surprise waiting for her, she was not very happy, to say the least. The shattered sugar bowl was one thing, but there sat Smokey helping himself to the coconut cake, which she had baked him that very morning for the church bazaar, so that's like a festival. Smokey was truly locked out of the house for several days after that caper, and even his good friend Emily couldn't help him out of that jam. So there's the picture again. So Smokey is in trouble. But Smokey eventually got back onto the good side of Mrs. Martin by keeping out of mischief for a while. However, true to his nature, it was only a short while. One morning, Emily's father was driving to town to run some errands. He was driving along a very busy highway when he realized that other drivers were honking their horns and pointing toward the front of his car. He was very confused. He knew his car was running well, and he couldn't for the life of him understand why all the honking was going on. When suddenly, up over the hood of his car emerged two small black paws. Between those two paws, a black mask. So this is describing Smokey. Smokey was hanging on the front of the car hood, his fur flying, enjoying the most thrilling ride he had ever had. Emily's father was not amused, though, since he had to pull the car over to the side of the busy highway, coax Smokey into the car, and deliver him back to the farm, scolding him all the way. The other motorists passing by on the highway watched all this happen in sheer amazement. So here we have Smokey, hanging on to the front of the car, with Emily's dad driving the car on the highway, and everyone around him is going crazy saying, "Hey, there's a raccoon on your car." And so then he pulled over to get Smokey to get in the car and bring him home. Emily and Smokey became true buddies as summer went on, getting in and out of one little scrape after another. But they had a lot of fun together. One thing that Smokey really liked was water. Emily would turn on the garden hose, and she and Smokey would struggle to take it away from each other. Emily usually lost that game and would have to go into the house to change from wet clothes to dry ones. Smokey even liked to wash his food in the running water as well before he ate it. But as usual, his love of water was another thing that got him into more trouble. See, so there's Emily and Smokey kind of fighting over the hose, and Emily got really wet. Emily's mother decided one hot afternoon to take a cool bath in their large bathtub, and so she ran her tub and went to her room to get her robe and bath towel. Suddenly, she heard loud splashing sounds coming from the bathroom. She ran quickly to see what could be wrong, and there was Smokey splashing about in her bath water. "Smokey!" she shouted. "Get out of there this minute!" Smokey apparently knew by the sound of her voice that he was in really bad trouble. Out of the bathroom he ran, his fur soaking wet with Mrs. Martin behind him, trying to chase him from the house. He took cover in the nearest thing he could find, which, unfortunately, was Mrs. Martin's large potted house plant. The plant was so tall it nearly reached the ceiling, and when Smokey attempted to climb up the plant, over it came, spilling the potting soil all over the living room carpet. Smokey spotted the opening in the screen where he had crawled through earlier to get inside, saw his chance to make a getaway, and out the window he ran as fast as any raccoon ever ran. "Emily!" shouted Mrs. Martin. "I have a job for you." Both Emily and Smokey were in trouble for some time over that little run-in with her mother. So here is the picture you've been waiting for of Smokey in the bathtub, and you can see Emily's mom is not very happy here. So Emily had to clean it up. But summer was more fun than Emily recalled. But the summer was coming to an end, and soon school would be starting again. More importantly, Emily's father had made plans for the family to go on a camping vacation together in Canada before she and her brother had to return to school. Ordinarily, Emily would have been very excited about such a trip, but now leaving meant that she would have to say goodbye to her friend Smokey. Because even though Smokey was very tame, raccoons are really considered wild animals, and wild animals would not be allowed to enter Canada. It would have been difficult as well to try keeping him out of trouble in all of the woods surrounding the campgrounds in Canada. Emily's mother assured her that Smokey would be quite capable of taking care of himself while they were gone. She promised to leave plenty of the dried dog food that Smokey had become fond of in the barn, and the barn door would also be left open for him to come and go. The neighbors agreed to check on Smokey while Emily and her family were gone to make sure he had plenty of food and water. And so, they prepared to leave on their camping trip. Everyone in the family was very busy packing all of their camping gear into the fishing boat that Emily's father would pull behind the family car. The boat was finally piled full with sleeping bags, fishing rods, and various camping equipment. Everyone was becoming very excited about the trip as the time to leave drew near. But despite Emily's growing excitement, she also felt a little sad when she thought about saying goodbye to Smokey. Actually, it was very peculiar that no one had seen Smokey the morning they were preparing to leave on their trip, and they delayed their departure for some time, looking for him until Emily's father at last insisted they must get started. So they stopped looking for Smokey, and they said, "You know what? We just have to get on the road." And so they had to leave without saying goodbye. All of the family was feeling a little sad, truth be known, and it was very quiet in the car as they headed north toward Canada. But Smokey was not finished with his mischief. They began to hear a familiar noise from the back of the car, and there was no sound like that except from that rascal raccoon. Smokey poked his black nose out from under the rolled back top of the family's convertible car, and when everyone realized what had happened, they all began to laugh. Emily's father couldn't help but laugh at the little mischief maker, even though it did delay the trip a little bit, because they had to turn around the car to take Smokey back to the farm and make sure he stayed there this time. But they all felt much happier having said their goodbyes to Smokey, and they drove away this final time and headed north to Canada once again. And at this point, everyone was still laughing at his latest mischief. So there's not a lot of pictures on this page, but just a little bit of a tree. This is just their journey up to Canada. Emily did in fact have lots of fun with her family on their campout. She loved swimming in the cold, clear water of the river on the hot and sunny days. Every morning, very early, all of the family would pile into their boat, and her father would cruise all about the lake looking for good fishing spots. There would be a great deal of excitement and shouting when they found a school of fish and began catching big ones. Emily especially liked to watch her mother cooking their meals over the outdoor fire and to smell the smoky aroma that filled the air. Sometimes after dark, they would all sit around the campfire roasting marshmallows or just sitting quietly, listening to the crackle of the fire, watching the fiery sparks fly off into the darkness. It was great fun, too, sleeping outdoors, listening to the night sounds, and yet feeling very safe with her family all near her. Here's a pretty picture of Emily and her mom on their camping trip. But even though she was having a very good time, once in a while Emily would become quite sad thinking of her absent friend Smokey. The problem was that she really believed Smokey would become bored on the farm with no one else around, and would once again return to his raccoon friends. Emily's mother felt certain that was true, but she wanted to help her daughter understand, as she did, that Smokey would really be healthier, happier, and even safer, living his life as a raccoon should. That is, with the freedom that wild animals most enjoyed, to explore the wonders of nature with his fellow raccoons. Perhaps Smokey might even have a raccoon family of his own one day. One evening, as they walked to the beach together, Emily's mother tried to explain these things to her daughter. "Do you understand," she finally asked Emily, "that Smokey's return to his raccoon friends is as natural for him as your return to school and to your own school friends?" Emily was very quiet for some time as they continued their walk, and she thought about all that her mother had just told her. Finally, she replied, "Yes, I think I do understand." And that is truly what did happen. Smokey had indeed returned to his raccoon world when Emily arrived back home. Shortly after, she returned to school as well, and was happily reunited with all of her old school friends. Emily's days were soon filled with schoolwork and playmates as she continued to explore the wonders of her world. And here's Smokey going back to his raccoon friends after a really fun summer with Emily. But she never ever forgot her old friend Smokey. Even after she became a grown-up woman, Emily would recall the happy times of that one very special summer when she was a young girl on the farm. Years later, her own children would hear bedtime stories about their adventures together, and the stories always began, "Once upon a time, a very long time ago, there was a raccoon, and his name was Smokey." And there is our friend Smokey. And that is the end of our book. So I hope you all enjoyed reading this book with me. I had a really fun time reading with you and hearing about all of Emily and Smokey's adventures. It sounds like they had a really fun summer together, and even though it was sad that they had to be apart, um, it's important to remember that Smokey was a wild animal and that Smokey was happy out in the wild with all of his raccoon friends when Emily went back to school. So, thank you so much again for reading with me tonight, and I hope you sleep really well. And I will see you again in a couple weeks for another bedtime story. So, have a really great night, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!